Get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach COLIN here. We got Joe Rogan's odd conversation with a data collection billionaire. I think that's what you should call Peter Thiel, quite honestly. It is a very interesting conversation. Now, the last episode I did, we were talking about everything that he tried to play down and the fact that he was kind of acting like he was one of us plebs, one of the peasants who have to type things in on Google and just trust the results that come up. He's like, oh, I was going down rabbit holes and whatnot. When in reality, he has that thing that Batman has, with all the screens of everybody everywhere, kind of like the architect in the Matrix, just all the versions of everything going on. That's what he really has access to. But anyway, aside from all that, there was one thing he did not play down. I guess he kind of did, but not really. He really laid into Bill Gates, and I found that very, very surprising. I thought maybe, you know how there's a bro code? I thought maybe there's a Bill code. There's no billionaires code where it's like, hey, man, you don't go on Joe Rogan and throw me under the bus. I thought there was something like that. Maybe he has something against Bill Gates. Maybe there's something you can tell me about in the comment section, but he went in on Bill Gates and really speculated some stuff about Bill and Melinda Gates. So let's get into that. Joe Rogan just finished explaining that maybe Bill Gates was around Epstein because he needed somebody to supply him with experiences that he couldn't just go out on Tinder and get himself because he's a high-profile person and it would be all over the news. Now, Peter has a different theory. Let's get into it.
All of that might be true, but I wonder if there are more straightforward alternate conspiracy theories on Epstein that we're missing. So let me do alternate one on Bill Gates, where the things just looking at what's hiding in plain sight. Mm-hmm. He supposedly talked to Epstein early on about how his marriage wasn't doing that well, and then Epstein suggested that he should get a divorce, circa 2010, 2011, and Gates told him something like, that doesn't quite work. He didn't have, presumably because he didn't have a prenup. So there's one part of Epstein as a marriage counselor, which is sort of disturbing. But then the second thing that we know that Gates talked to Epstein about was all this sort of collaborating on funding, setting up this philanthropy, all this sort of this somewhat corrupt left-wing philanthropy structures. And so there's a question, and then my sort of straightforward alternate conspiracy theory is should we combine those two? And was there and I don't have all the details on this figured out, but it would be something like, Bill and Melinda get married in 1994. They don't sign a prenup, and something's going wrong with the marriage, and maybe Melinda can get half the money. In a divorce, he doesn't want her to get half the money. What do you do? And then the alternate plan is something like you commit the marital assets to this nonprofit, and then it sort of locks Melinda into not complaining about the marriage for a long, long time. Mm. And it's some kind of a to this nonprofit, and then it sort of locks Melinda into not complaining about the marriage for a long, long time. Mm. And it's something like this.
And that's also an effective way to whitewash your past, right? Your thought.
Sure, there are all these, and he talked to Epstein about. He got Epstein to meet with the head of the Nobel Prize Foundation. So it was, Bill Gates wanted to get a Nobel Prize.
Wow.
Right. So this is all straightforward. This is all known. Yeah. And I'm not saying what you're saying about.
Do you know the history of the Nobel Prize? That's the ultimate whitewash.
Sure, it was for inventing dynamite.
Yeah, that's Peter Berg told me the story. I was blown away.
Let's skip this part really quick. It's just, the history of the Nobel Prize. Some guy was a dirtbag and he realized he was a dirtbag, and then he wanted his legacy to be something better, so he made the Nobel Prize. It's basically a farce. Who cares? Anyway, let's get into it.
Understandable and ironic. Yeah. But I think But then so there's a underage sex version of the Epstein story, and then there is a crazy status Nobel Prize history of it, and there is a corrupt left-wing philanthropy one, and there is a boomers who didn't sign prenuptial agreements with their wives story,
right?
And I think all of those are worth exploring more.
I think you're right. What about these?
Sorry, which one do I think is most corrupt? Or what?
No, what about them? These when you said corrupt?
Yeah. Well, man, it's there's something about. Maybe it's just my hermeneutic of suspicion, but there's something about, there's something about the virtue signaling and what does it mean? And I always think this is sort of a America versus Europe difference, where in America we're told that that philanthropy is something a good person does, and if you're a Rockefeller and you start giving away all your money. This is just what a good person does, and it shows how good you are. And then I think sort of the European intuition on it is something like, wow, that's only something a very evil person does. And if you start giving away all your money in Europe, it's like, Joe, you must have murdered somebody, or you must be covering up for something. And so there are these two very different intuitions, and I think the European one is more correct than the American one. And probably there's some history where, the sort of left-wing philanthropy peaked in 2007, 2010, 2012, and there's these subtle ways, we've become more, more European in our sensibilities as a society, and so it has this very different valence from what it did 12 or 14 years ago. But it's all. We ask all these questions like we're asking right now about Bill Gates, where it's like, okay, he was, it was like all the testimony in the Microsoft antitrust trial in the 90s, where he's cutting off the air supply, he wants to strangle people, and he's kind of a sociopathic guy, it seems. And then it's this giant whitewashing operation, and then somehow the whitewashing has been made too transparent, and it gets deconstructed and exposed by the internet or whatever.
But I think most people are still unaware of how much whitewashing actually took place, including donating somewhere in the neighborhood of $300+ million to media corporations, essentially buying favorable reviews about him. And then there's this very public philanthropy. It's not just philanthropy; it's philanthropy mixed with public relations, because he's constantly doing interviews about it. It's just not like a guy who is just silently donating his incredible wealth to all these causes. He's advocating for it on various talk shows. He's constantly talking about it and how we need to do things. I mean, during the pandemic, he was a very vocal voice. He was the guy telling us somehow or another, he became a public health expert. And no one questioned why we were taking public health advice. Talk shows, he's constantly talking about it and how we need to do things. I mean, during the pandemic, he was a very vocal voice. He was the guy telling us somehow or another, he became a public health expert. And no one questioned.
I think it's not working as well as it used to.
I agree.
And there is a way people see through this. It's not always as articulate as you just articulated it, but there's some vague intuition that when Mr. Gates is just wearing sweaters and looks like Mr. Rogers, that something fishy is going on.
Right.
People have that sort of intuition.
They trust Jeff Bezos in his tight shirt, hanging out with his girlfriend on a yacht more.
Or Elon Musk. The vice signaling is safer than virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're virtue signaling, our intuition is something really, really, really sketchy.
Suspicious. We get suspicious, and I think rightly so. I think especially when someone's doing something so public. I think rightly we should be suspicious, especially with Gates, it's like the history of the guy. I mean, you know what he was involved with before. You know how he ran Microsoft. kind of makes sense that it's a clever move. It's a clever move to pay the media. It's a clever move.
Again, my alternate one, which is not incompatible with yours on Gates, is that Melinda finally files for divorce in early 21. I think she told Bill she wanted one late 2019. So 2020, the year where Bill Gates goes into overdrive on COVID, all this stuff. Part of it, maybe it's self-dealing and he's trying to make money from the drug company or something like this. But, isn't the other really big thing, he needs to box Melinda in and force her not to get that much out, because all the money's going to the foundation anyway. Melinda has to say, why do you want half the money? It's all going to the Gates Foundation anyway. We're not leaving our kids anything. And then when you lean into COVID, how does that work in the, it's somehow, in theory, Melinda has a really strong hand. She should get half. That's what you get in a divorce with no prenuptial. But then if you make it go overdrive on COVID, Melinda, are you like some crazy anti-science person?
Right.
And so I don't know. My reconstruction is that you should not underestimate how much of it was, about just controlling his ex-wife and not about controlling the whole society.
Makes sense. It makes sense that you would be
they can both be true.
motivated.
They can both be correct.
Sure, there's many factors.
But mine lines up really well with the timeline.
Well, we're probably talking about $100 million or $100 billion, one way or the other.
Well, I think she got like 1/10.
Really interesting.
And she should have gotten half. As far as it's amazing he got it down that much.
Wow, interesting.
But it was just I think she was just boxed in every time he went on TV talking about COVID. She was boxed in with all of her left-wing friends.
That is an interesting philosophy. That's an interesting way to approach a problem if you're him. Very wise, very clever. I mean, if you're just looking at just for personal benefit, it's a genius move. And the guy's a genius, clearly, brilliant guy. That makes sense. Makes sense that he would do that.
I don't know.
I would do that.
Probably should have had a prenup, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's kind of crazy. That's interesting. I didn't consider that, but it makes sense. And she's been kind of pretty vocal, unfortunately for him, about his ties to Epstein being one of the primary reasons why she wanted out.
But again, it's was he having extramarital affairs through Epstein, or maybe Epstein was, from Melinda's point of view, would it be worse for Epstein to facilitate an extramarital affair, or would it be worse for Epstein to be advising Gates on how to ditch Melinda without giving her any money?
What do you think he was?
I think that would be much, much worse from Melinda's point of view.
Yeah, makes sense. It totally makes sense. Do you think that he was a legitimate financial advisor? Like he could give him advice on how to do those things? That Gates wouldn't have more effective people? I mean, when you're at that level of wealth, I'm sure you have wealth management people that are very high level. Because that's one of the things that Eric said about him. He said when he met him, he was like, "This guy's a fraud. He doesn't know enough about what he's talking about." And Eric is.
I met Epstein a few times as well, and I think.
How'd you get introduced?
It was Reed Hoffman in Silicon Valley introduced us in 2014, but it was basically, and I didn't ask enough questions about it, but I think there were sort of a lot of things where it was fraudulent. I do think Epstein knew a lot about taxes.
Very interesting stuff. I'm sorry for the little blips there back and forth. That was very interesting, especially that Reed Hoffman part. Let me just look in the Reed Hoffman really quick. I don't know. What do you guys think about what he just said? Reed Hoffman. What do you think about what he was just saying? Here's the thing. Is that Reed Hoffman? What happened? No, I don't want a link in there. No. Reed Hoffman, huh? Okay. Check this guy out. So this guy is the one that introduced him. That is so crazy. And I love how he just brought it up real slick, like, oh, just, yeah, I met Jeffrey a few times. Hey, man, what do you mean? What do you mean, buddy? Tech billionaire who visited Epstein's island. Oh, goodness. Donates nearly $700,000 to the Biden campaign. Of course, birds of a feather kind of thing. Not saying anything about that gentleman. I don't know. Maybe he's just, he could be just a liberal. That's all. Let's just put it over here. It was revealed that Hoffman had previously visited Epstein's private island. The donation coincided with a Wall Street Journal article reporting Hoffman to visit the island in 2014, saying he had planned to return to Epstein's island later that year. Here's the thing. When Peter brings that up, that's kind of telling, because it is said that Epstein would grab one guy who's a billionaire, bring him to the island, get some stuff on him, and then be like, listen, bring me more billionaires. This is what you're going to do for me. We're not having fun together. You can do that again if you want. I don't care. But you have to bring me more people. And then all of a sudden, that gentleman introduces him to Peter Thiel. And if you were intelligence for another nation, right, that would be the person you want. You'd want Peter Thiel. You'd want to try and get something on him, because then you have access to his company. And then you have access to, you're basically accessing the United States government at that point, the intelligence agencies at that point, right? So interesting that happened. I don't know about his theory, though, because here's the thing. He brings up a solid theory, but then he does the same thing where he's kind of playing it down, where he says, it was more about Bill controlling his wife than society. It's like, I don't know. I lived through 2020. I don't know about the rest of you. I lived through 2020. That gentleman seemed like he wanted control of quite a bit over what we did, okay? He compared people who didn't want to wear masks to people who don't want to wear pants in public, okay? He was going pretty hard. I'm just saying. That could have been about money. Maybe he's just like a solid businessman like that, so he was just doing what he had to do to make all the money he needed to make. But then also he kind of plays down. He goes, he's kind of bringing up what's worse for Melinda Gates. Some guy is advising your husband how to keep money from you, a massive amount of money. But at the end of the day, you're Melinda Gates. You're walking away with a few billion. What's the problem there? Your kids are solidly taken care of for the rest of their lives. Yeah, they might not be left anything, but blah, blah, blah. They're going to be given positions in the Gates Foundation. They're going to have access to it. It's like that whole, I'm not giving my kids anything, is such a lie. Come on. His daughter's probably going to be on the chair, going to be part of the board, and she's going to have access to the money. Of course she is. What are we talking about here? You're going to have access to the plane, the monies, the power, to everything. It's actually better for them to be a part of that foundation than it is for them just to be left a lump sum of money that they don't know what to do with. They'll lose that money. That foundation is running itself right now and has its hands in all sorts of things. So that's what they get when their father and their mother pass away. But what he's bringing up is, what's worse? This lady's losing a bunch of money because of Epstein, or her husband went to an island and did whatever you do there. And we can all fill in the blank there. What's worse? I think the island's worse. I'm just saying. I think it's a little worse. And then also, just to talk about Bill Gates and the $300 million to the media. Do you know, I did an episode on this, and it's so hard to find because I've done like 1,300 videos, but I did an episode on this, and it's not just that he paid the media, like he just said, here's CNN. It's not that. He's paying schools of journalism. So a lot of people, the same way Vivek got a Soros scholarship for like $150,000, $180,000 or something like that. You get things like that from Bill Gates as a journalist coming out of school. So he's not just looking at the legacy media as it is, the actual buildings, the MSNBCs, et cetera, et cetera. He's not just putting money there. He's putting money in the schools. So you come out, you're in school knowing what a great guy Bill is. You're coming out of journalism school knowing what a great guy Bill is. And then you're going into the workforce of those huge outlets knowing what a great guy he is. So it's it's deeper than what they were saying. There's a whole thing to it, and it's more than 300 million. It's a whole bunch of money. It's crazy. And then I have to say, Europe has the right idea when it comes to people who are virtue signaling, giving away all their money. Europe has the right idea. You got to look at people like that. More often than not, you have to look at people who are like that. When people are fighting tooth and nail in the name of, like female rights, those male feminist types, when they're virtue signaling, the guy who's just basically like you could frame as sexist, that guy, he's out in the open about who he is, but the guy who's fighting for like female rights, he's like, oh, they don't have enough rights, and he's a male feminist. That guy's, there's a reason he's doing that. Okay. We all know what that reason is. Okay. We all know. I know there's going to be some ladies that are like, I don't know. What do you mean? Us guys know what that guy's after. Straight up. Oh, man. But yeah, that was a very interesting theory about Bill Gates. He's trying to box in his wife. That's why he's around Epstein. I don't buy it. I think if you were around Epstein, you got pulled in based on the fact that he was this tax guy. That's probably how he got into the rooms. He was the billionaire guy, the philanthropy, blah, 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 blah. That's how he got into the rooms. That's how he got around these people. Then when you got to know him, he was like, you could do X, Y, Z. Then he probably saw that you were cool. You were kind of taking the bait. Then he says, hey, listen, I got an island. Anything goes. Nobody knows when we go there. We take my plane. It's all good. You should come by. And then you do that. You do what you got to do. The same way Diddy's house is rigged up with cameras, because we just learned about that just a few months ago, and we've all forgotten as well what's going on with Diddy. The same way Diddy's house was rigged up with cameras, his place was rigged up with cameras. You did whatever you wanted to do, and after it all, he sees you again and he says, hey, listen, I want you to do this for me. I want you to give me this. And the person, whoever it is, tech billionaire, goes, I'm not doing that for you. And then he shows him a video. You don't understand. Or maybe you do. This is done. It's already been confirmed. I shouldn't say confirmed. I'll still say alleged. I don't know. With Diddy. Okay. That's the music industry. There are rappers who talk about this exact same thing happening to people who don't want to sign contracts. And they party with a bunch of people, executives, blah, blah, blah. They have a drink that they weren't watching. And the next thing you know, they wake up. They think they just had a good night. They get presented with a garbage contract. They say, I'm not signing this. There's a guy who tells this story verbatim. He says, play the tape. And then he sees himself on TV doing a bunch of stuff he doesn't remember. This seems to be the play, from music to tech to politics. This seems to be the play. And it's hard to see who's behind the Diddys or who's behind the Epsteins or who's behind it all. But I don't know. It all seems, I don't know. I know. Well, I don't know, but you know. We both know. Come on. We all got tinfoil Speedos on. Am I right, guys? Come on. We're all wearing tinfoil Speedos. Come on. We all know what's going on here. It's all for intelligence. Let's just say that. Let me know what you think. Peter Thiel looking very nervous, looking very wired, but willing to very much lay into Bill Gates. Everything else, it's like, oh, maybe the intelligence agency had nothing to do with it. Maybe the Biden administration had nothing to do with it. And then when it comes to Bill Gates, he's like, let's just lay into Bill Gates. I didn't see that. He must have a bone to pick with Bill Gates. Or maybe it's because he's friends with Elon Musk. Bill Gates has been shorting Tesla for years now, which basically in stock world just means he's betting on Tesla to lose. If Tesla loses, he makes money. Elon doesn't like that. Elon refuses to work with Bill because of that. And they've had this riff. Peter is friends with Elon Musk. I don't know. Maybe that's how it works. I don't know. I'm playing billionaire chess here. I'm just trying to figure it out. But let me know what you think about this whole thing. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. And other than that, I'm out.